So, welcome back to the third installment of this series, where today we'll look at a few recordings of Gaetano Donizetti's opera, Lucia di Lammermoor. If you're new here, you can look at how this series works in our first two videos, which I have reviewed recordings of Tosca and Pagliacci. But if you already know how this is going to work, let's just jump right in right now. So allow me to restate a rule of thumb. Don't get or listen to anything recorded after the turn of the millennium. The first category that we'll talk about are good and commercially available recordings. The second one are good and rare recordings. Third one are dark horses. Fourth one are film or video recordings. Fifth one are commercially available recordings to avoid. And the sixth one will be good recordings of arias and scenes. So let's talk about the premiere of this opera, shall we? It was in 1835. The title role was sung by Fanny Persiani. According to documents, she had an effortless high F, and her roles not only included Amina, Adina, Rosina, these kind of typical coloratura roles, but also heavier ones such as Imogen, Lucrezia Borgia, and Elvira from Verdi's Ernani. So perhaps we could say that she was a dramatic coloratura soprano. The baritone role of Enrico was sung in the premiere by Domenico Gozzelli. He was regarded as the first Verdi baritone. And in the published score, which contains downward transpositions when compared to Gozzelli's performance, that score was not what he sang in the premiere. And those transpositions came as a result due to other baritones at the time were unable to sustain the same high tessitura, the Verdi baritone tessitura, as Gozzelli's. Edgardo, the main tenor role, was sung by Gilbert Duprez. He was the inventor of the do di petto, the high C sung from the chest, and he was regarded as the pioneer of the dramatic tenor that we hear today. So let us go to our checkpoints, shall we? The first one that I'll introduce is the title role of Lucia. The checkpoint that I would suggest you check out to determine whether or not it's a good performance of the role will be her flute cadenza in the mat scene. So many of you might know about this cadenza, but let's talk about the history of it, shall we? The creator of the role, Fanny Persiani, she also took a cadenza in the same place, but without a flute accompaniment. This flute cadenza was believed to be created by Australian soprano Nellie Melba in 1889. The cadenza was written by her teacher, Matilde Marchesi. She wrote 3 versions of the cadenza, and after much evolution, the most commonly heard version that we will hear in the recordings now, it has been created by Italian soprano Totti Dal Monte in 1926. Sutherland, however, Joan Sutherland, takes Nellie Melba's version plus her own variations. What you should hear in this flute cadenza? Well, firstly, obviously, it's a cadenza, so it's the soprano showing off, and it's her voice completely naked. So what you want to expect from this cadenza is a light voice that isn't too bulky when, traveling through the coloratura runs. It should be, light, but it shouldn't be a mosquito voice, a small voice, or it shouldn't be too breathy either. Also, you will want to hear some vocal acting here because, after all, it's her mad scene. You need to hear a delirious state in her voice, so to say. So she's just not singing all the coloratura roles. She sings all the notes perfectly, but it doesn't matter if she doesn't, sound like she's going mad. Our second checkpoint here is for the role tenor role, Edgardo. This is from the finale of Act 2. It starts Hai tradito and it ends Vi disperda. So this one. This passage contains two high A naturals before Lucia's note. There he's accusing Lucia, his lover, of betraying their love in front of a whole crowd. It's a high tessitura to sustain, so you can see whether or not it's actually an audible tenor sound, so to say, because it might be sung by some really light tenor who can't be heard. Or if it's a full dramatic tenor, maybe they can't sustain that high tessitura. After Lucia sings her note, he has to sing Vi disperda. The first note is written an A natural, a high A natural, but usually it's sung A natural, high B flat, and then an A natural. So it's sort of an improvisation. Then he sings Vi disperda. It's an Italian expression meaning God destroy you. So it has to be sung or even yelled out with great emotion. So here you can listen to whether or not the Edgardo has the appropriate vocal acting. Does he really pour out his soul in the singing? And also the B flat interpolation can determine whether or not he has the correct range or tessitura to carry out this whole role.
Hai tradito il cielo, maledetto, maledetto sia l'istante che di te mi vedi amante, sirpenico abominata, io dovea, sapessi, abominata, maledetta io dovea, da te fuggì.
The third checkpoint we have here are shared by the two characters Enrico, the baritone, and Raimondo, the bass. It's from Act 1 and it goes Egli ora via. It's before Enrico's cabaletta. So what we can hear here is a direct comparison of two voices in their middle tessitura. The range here is an F sharp 3 to an E flat 4 for both characters. So what we should hear here is that Raimondo is a bass, whereas Enrico is a baritone. So logically, we have to hear that Raimondo must be darker. But conversely, Enrico is a villain, whereas Raimondo is a good character. Therefore, Enrico must be the more powerful voice out of the two. The common issue with this scene here, or the casting of these two roles, is that Raimondo, because being the smaller role, often is cast by a supporting bass. So it's not a big bass, it's one of the ones that would usually sing character roles. In that case, he might be incompetent, he might not be darker than the baritone. The second case is that a lyric or non-Verdi baritone is cast as Enrico. Then he would be incompetent because he won't sound powerful, and he would be outshined by Raimondo, who is a good character. So that's the three checkpoints we have here. And let's move on to our recordings.
non vo.
So for our first category, good and commercially available recordings, for our first inclusion, it is a double bill. It's not a single recording, but two related recordings. These two are studio recordings of Lucia di Lammermoor with Maria Callas in the title role and conducted by Tullio Serafin. So let's see the cast here. The first one, the first studio recording, is from 1958, and in the title role, of course, is Maria Callas. Edgardo is sung by Giuseppe Di Stefano, Enrico is Tito Gobi, and Raimondo is Raffaele Arias. The second one, from 6 years later, is from 1956 with Ferruccio Tagliavini as Edgardo, Piero Capucilli as Enrico, and Bernard Ladiche as Raimondo. So let's talk about these two. These two are probably the most famous recordings of Lucia di Lammermoor, and there has been quite some debate on whether which one of these is the best Lucia of Callas. Well, for me, it's neither of the two. It's actually one of the live recordings that I will mention in the next segment. But let's take a look at these two recordings first. The 1953 obviously showcases Callas in much better voice. It's a more solid tone, and there is non-wobbly high notes, so to say. It's not her in her best form because she never recorded well in the studio, but it's a reference to what her ideal Lucia would sound like because it's made in studio. The other one from 1959, well, this one showcases her with more artistry, with a more refined and nuanced interpretation, because after singing this role for 6 or 7 years, she would have had a very good reading of the score, and there is a much more nuanced reading of the title role here by Callas, although the high notes here might be a bit wobbly, but it doesn't matter because she sings very artistically here. I don't think that if you're here for Callas Lucia, you should get any of these two. If you're not, bothered by the sound quality, that is. These two studio recordings are very well because obviously they have Callas in the title role, whom I consider the finest Lucia di Lammermoor ever, and reason I will explain later in her live recordings, which are her best recordings of this role. I don't think that the casts for these two are exceptionally good. The first one has Giuseppe Di Stefano as Edgardo. I think he is the best Edgardo ever. But same as Callas, he recorded much better in live recordings, also featuring Callas in the title role. From the 53 recording as well, Tito Gobi and Raffaele Arias, both are great artists and suitable for their role, but again, there isn't, singing that blows you away. For the 59 recording, however, the cast is not a stellar one. Well, Edgardo is Ferruccio Tagliavini. He is too light a voice for Edgardo, to be honest. He is an excellent lyric tenor, but again, the creator was the pioneer of the dramatic tenor, so this role is probably not for him. Piero Capucilli is Enrico. He is impeccable. He's unparalleled singing, the emotional arias written by Verismo, composer of Verdi. But I don't think that all round he is a great Verdi baritone, or a great baritone in general, because he lacks the bite and the solidity in tone to sing evil characters. And the fact is, most baritones are evil characters. So Enrico is one of them, and Capucilli doesn't, live up to expectations when you tell him to sing some villain stuff. He does do, Renato and Gerard very well, though, because of the moving aria that the character has to sing in the role. Bernard Ladiche is Raimondo. He's just another decent lyric base, nothing special. Certainly not better than Arias. For these two recordings, you can get them if you're a fan of, Callas in studio, Callas doing commercial stuff. It would be what she wanted it to sound like because, well, it's a studio recording after all, but it doesn't have the thrilling quality of the live recordings, which I'll introduce in the next segment. Another one that I've put in this category, good and commercially available recordings, is the famous Berlin LUCIA, conducted by Herbert von Karajan, with again Di Stefano and Callas in the leading roles respectively. Enrico is Rolando Panerai and Raimondo is Nicola Zaccaria. This one is a famous recording because apparently it showcases Callas in incredible form. I have to disagree here. She's already past her prime in terms of coloratura roles. By 1955, Di Stefano sings very excitingly here, but not as well as the Mexico recording, which I will introduce later. Same case for Callas. Although it's a live recording, it has studio sound, so that's a pro, but the cons are they don't sing as excitingly as you would expect from a live recording. They did encore and the sextet, which is very weird because very seldom do people encore an ensemble, but whatever. Again, she's starting to be a bit thin and wobbly here, certainly not as well sung as the versions from 52 and 53, but the rest of the cast also, Panerai is okay as Enrico. He does do, villain roles decently. Zaccaria as Raimondo, another nice lyric bass, but nothing extraordinary. However, Callas, again, is the best Lucia ever, and if you have to listen to her Lucia, go for the Mexico recording, and be patient, I'll talk about that in a moment. Our next recording in this category is from 1959 and conducted by Tullio Serafin again. This time, it's with the orchestra and chorus of Covent Garden, and it shows Joan Sutherland in the role debut of what is, arguably, her most famous role. Apart from her being the star on this recording, there's actually nothing that special. João Guibin, the Brazilian tenor, is Edgardo. Enrico is John Shaw, and Raimondo is Joseph Rouleau. These three aren't, that special. João Guibin is a bit too rough for Edgardo, I would say, and Rouleau is a weak bass. However, Sutherland sings amazingly here. Remember that this was her role debut of the most famous role that she had sung, but in the role debut of her signature role, this is somehow the best recording of the role that we can find that she has sung. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of, the preparation and the excitement of singing this role. It's a perfect match for her, and her first performance in the role already blows you away. Her mad scene here is only comparable, I believe, with the versions of Zeani, Krencher, and of course, Callas in Mexico. All things considered, it is a very important historical document, again showcasing Sutherland in the role debut of her signature role, so, why not? The fourth one here we have is conducted by Georges Pretre with the RCA Italiana Opera Orchestra and Chorus. Lucia is sung by Anna Moffo, Edgardo is Carlo Begonzi, Enrico is Mario Sereni, Raimondo is Ezio Flagello. It's recorded in studio in 1965. Now let's talk about the cast, shall we? Anna Moffo, what a Lucia she was. She was an excellent coloratura or lyric soprano. Her voice, the tone of her voice, was a bit marbly in quality. And in terms of her vocal acting, she really does seem that she's going mad in the mad scene. It's perhaps the most convincing interpretation in terms of, her mad scene going mad. And Moffo does it exceptionally here. She might not have the best high notes, but just for the sake of her vocal acting, it's definitely worth a listen. Carlo Begonzi is one of my favorite Edgardos and one of my favorite tenors in general. His Suicide aria, which ends the opera, is excellent here as well. It's it's a marbly quality. It's a lyric tenor quality, but it isn't as light as, Tagliavini that I've just said. It's, I can't explain it. You have to listen to his voice yourself, but it's very pleasing to the ear, and certainly it's a very convincing interpretation of Edgardo. Now, Enrico is Mario Sereni. I never liked him in, villain roles. He is a great, Silvio or, Tonio in terms of uh, lighter roles or maybe roles with lyric quality or lyric arias. But here, as Enrico, I'm not convinced. Ezio Flagello as Raimondo, again, an excellent lyric bass. Really, really well sung Raimondo here. So it's all round a decent recording, not bad. Our fifth and final inclusion here is again in studio from 1971, conducted by Richard Bonygne. Obviously, Lucia is Joan Sutherland, Edgardo is Luciano Pavarotti, Enrico is Cheryl Milnes, and Raimondo is Nikolai Khayrov. Now, I've talked about Sutherland's Lucia. She doesn't sing as well as she did in, the early recordings from 59 and, from the 60s. But here, the rest of the cast is excellent. Enrico here, especially, is Cheryl Milnes, and he does the role exceptionally. They transposed up the duet of Lucia and Enrico by a whole tone. That means Milnes takes a high A, and Lucia Sutherland takes a high E natural at the very end of the duet. I mean, it's so exciting. Again, Edgardo Luciano Pavarotti, quite a controversial figure in opera, to be honest, but he sings well here. His Suicide aria isn't the most, passionate or the most convincing, but in terms of purity and beauty of tone, you can't go wrong with Pavarotti. Khayrov as Raimondo. Now, Khayrov is, up there with Siepi as the best bass ever. And here he shows that he doesn't only do, dramatic bass roles, he can also give a very moving lyric bass role and give a very, convincing interpretation. And he does that incredibly here. His aria is very well sung with nuances and clarity of tone, as well as, the moving vocal quality. Now, moving on to our second category, these are excellent but rare and hard to find recordings of the opera. The first one is again not a single opera but a series of related ones. These are Callas live Lucias, and here are three. The first one is from 1952, from Mexico, Palacio de las Bellas Artes, with Guido Pico on the podium, Di Stefano as Edgardo, Piero Campoloni as Enrico, and Roberto Silva as Raimondo. The second one is from La Scala, with Di Stefano again as Edgardo, Rolando Panerai as Enrico, and Raimondo here is Giuseppe Modesti. Karajan is the conductor. Our third one is conducted by Francesco Molinari Pradelli with the orchestra and chorus of Teatro di San Carlo di Napoli. Callas is again the Lucia, Edgardo is Gianni Raimondi, and Enrico is the Rolando Panerai again, and Raimondo is sung by Antonio Zerbini. Piero de Palma is Arturo here as well. Actually, apart from these three that I'm going to introduce here, there's another one from the Metropolitan, also from 1956, with Callas in the title role. But I don't think that one is, worth a listen. It's her only recording from the Met, except from her Tosca with Corelli that I've mentioned in my Tosca video. But she doesn't take the high notes in the Met scene here, and also the rest of the cast is mediocre. Also, she doesn't sing as well as the three recordings I've chosen here, so I mean you can give it a listen, but I don't recommend it as much as the three here. So let's get into it, shall we? First one from Mexico, 1952. Wow, this one. Incredible. It's probably the best recording of Lucia di Lammermoor ever. Now, it's undisputed that there is only one complete recording from Mexico of Callas' Lucia di Lammermoor, but there are two other recordings of her mad scene, one labeled 16th June and the other labeled 28th June. Now, the mad scene from the 28th June is a real recording. The whole thing doesn't exist, but that indeed is the mad scene from the 28th. The other one, however, labeled 16th June, is actually the same recording of the mad scene as the encore that she sang on the 10th, which is the complete recording, by the way. So the 16th one is a hoax. There are only 2 nights, but 3 mad scenes because she encored it on the first night. So let's talk about the recording itself. Callas, Lucia, her best recording of the best Lucia ever. That's pretty self-explanatory. The mad scene here, especially the encore, is incomparable. I have no idea how you can, sing this extra demanding mad scene once and do an encore and do even better in the encore. It blows you away. I mean, just listen to it. You won't regret it at all. The other, scenes in this recording is incredible as well. The Act 1 aria in Cabaletta, she caps it off with 2 massive high Ds. That was again the case in the Act 2 finale and the end of the duet with Enrico, and so many more high Cs and C sharps throughout the entire opera. Those are tremendous notes, earth-shaking notes that you have to listen to. Edgardo here is Giuseppe Di Stefano. It's his second best Edgardo recording, except from the 1959 studio that I'll talk about later in the Dark Horses section. He is in incredible vocal form here. In fact, I've put his rendition of the words Vi disperda earlier in the video. You can see how passionate he's singing here. The vocal acting is unparalleled. Piero Campoloni, a baritone that some people love, some people hate. I'm in the part of people that love him. Well, his Enrico, like any other roles that he had sung, is rough. It's not very refined, but that's what you want in the villain role, right? Roberto Silva, decent lyric bass. Yeah. Our second recording from this series, let's move on, is from La Scala. Karajan again conducts. This is the same production of with the Berlin one, except the theater in which they sung was different. The major change here is that Raimondo is no longer Nicola Zaccaria but sung by Giuseppe Modesti. Again, a decent lyric base, nothing special though. Callas and Di Stefano and Panerai, I think, sing a bit better than in the Berlin recording, but the sound quality is not nearly as good. So it's basically a better version of the Berlin, but with poorer sound. Our third one is from Napoli. Well, Molinari Pradelli is not a bad conductor, but nothing special again. Panerai is again Enrico. Zerbini, decent Raimondo, not much to write home about. Gianni Raimondi is an incredible Edgardo. I mean, he has a spinto voice. He can sing, big spinto roles, but he has a lyric temperament, which it's a great sound to listen to. It's pleasing to the ear, and he is a very moving, very convincing Edgardo indeed. Callas here is in great form, I would say. Very good for 1956 coloratura roles that she had sung. The mad scene here is sung with much more vocal solidity and, with better notes, high notes, than the Met performance from the same year. And actually, there are 2 nights of this recorded, but from the second night, The only thing that survives is the mat scene again. At least that's what I remember. I'm not sure though. Again, this recording is, you know, all around a very, very good one. It showcases Callas exciting Lucia, not in her best form, but it's surely better than the Mets one that you can get, but just listen to it first. Now, our second recording here is from 1957. Vincenzo Belleza conducts the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra with Lucia, Virginia Zeani. Edgardo is Giacinto Brandelli, Enrico is Enzo Sordello, and Raimondo is Lorenzo Gaetani. Now, Sordello, Gaetani, nothing special. Zeani, however, in the title role of Lucia, is incredible. Zeani was one of the only sopranos, next to Callas and Hencher, who could do Lucia and, Tosca, Aida at the same time. And wow, what a Lucia she is. Owing to the fact that she's a spinto soprano who can sing coloratura roles, you can definitely hear a massive voice doing the role while, going through the coloratura passages with incredible ease. And it's an excellent recording. It showcases Zeani at her best, doing what she's most comfortable at. And with Zeani at her best, it's really not much sopranos can match her. Prandelli is another excellent tenor, an excellent Edgardo. I would say that he's a spinto or a dramatic tenor with a lyric temperament. He recorded Lohengrin with Tebaldi, so you can see that he's not, a small-voiced Edgardo at all, and he doesn't have much vocal acting going on, but it's a very solid and a very convincing voice. Our third recording is again from 1957. This time the conductor is Oliviero de Fabritiis. Edgardo is again Giacinto Brandelli, but this time Enrico is Nino Carta, Raimondo is Antonio Massaria, and the title role here is sung by La Diva Turca Leila Hencher. Now, Hencher, I've mentioned just a moment ago, is the only few sopranos, along with Zeani and Callas, who can do Lucia as well as dramatic roles. But what she does here with the role is mind-blowing. If you listen to her mad scene, she had a vocal asset that is unparalleled, which is the way she floats pianissimi that we can hear in the mad scene. I've already put a part of that, the flute cadenza, earlier in the video, but the rest of it is just as miraculous. Fourth one we have here is conducted by Rudolf Kruger with the Fort Worth Opera Orchestra and Chorus. Title role is sung by Lily Pons, Edgardo is Placido Domingo, Enrico is Benjamin Racine, and Raimondo is Joshua Hecht. It's from 1962 live in Fort Worth. Now, this is an incredibly precious historical recording. Why? Because this was Lily Pons at the age of 58, singing her very last Lucia di Lammermoor, and it was Placido Domingo's first Edgardo. So there's a 37-year age gap between the couple, and Domingo is in excellent form here. His early recordings in the lyric tenor repertoire are incredible. And Lily Pons, at the age of 58, after doing these most demanding coloratura roles for more than 30 years, is still in very good voice here in her last reading of this role. And it's a testament to the vocal longevity of Pons and the, talent of the very young Domingo that we can hear here. So our last one from this category is from the Metropolitan Opera. It's from 1971 and it's conducted by Carlo Franci. Roberta Peters is Lucia here. Franco Corelli is Edgardo, Matteo Manuguerra is Enrico, and Bonaldo Gaiotti is Raimondo. Now, Peters is not a competent Lucia at all. She has the voice of Queen of the Night as Zerbinetta, a really high, really light coloratura soprano role. Not Lucia di Lammermoor, who has to have a big voice, obviously, and her Lucia is completely overshadowed by Franco Corelli's Edgardo. Listen to the duets, you can't hear Roberta Peters at all. All of that is Corelli. This is the only instance that he had sung this role. He only sang it 2 times at the Met, and the second night he cancelled after the first time. So this is the only instance of a full Edgardo sung by Corelli, and what an Edgardo he is. The audience goes absolutely crazy after the finale, the suicide aria, and I think a critic said that the sextet from Lucia became Edgardo's aria with a chorus of 5 soloists. It just proves how amazing this performance is. It's not in very good sound at all, but Corelli's Edgardo is absolutely historical. You have to listen to that. Now we move on to Dark Horse's overlooked or ignored recordings that don't seem as good as they actually are. The first one we have here is the first complete recording of this opera from 1929 in studio, conducted by Lorenzo Molajoli with the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. The title role is sung by Mercedes Capsiur. Edgardo is Enzo de Muro Lomanto. Enrico is Enrico Molinari, and Raimondo is Salvatore Baccaloni. Capsiur is an absolutely first-class Lucia. She wasn't as good as, Tetrazzini or Galli-Curci from the same era, but she was still a very, very competent old-school coloratura soprano who had all the chest voice, had the runs, had the cadenza, and had everything. And it's an excellent old-school coloratura voice that can't go wrong, simply. Lucia. Edgardo is Enzo de Muro Lamanto, nothing special about that. Enrico is Enrico Molinari, a great baritone. Raimondo here is sung by Salvatore Baccaloni, perhaps the most famous buffo bass of our generation, but here is his earlier years in serious roles, and he does give a very convincing portrayal of the role of Raimondo. The second recording on this list is from 1951 in studio, conducted by Franco Capuana. The title role here is sung by Dolores Wilson, Edgardo is Gianni Poggi, Enrico is Anselmo Colzani, and Raimondo is Silvio Maionica. Now, Dolores Wilson, I have no idea why she's being forgotten. Almost no one knows about her nowadays, but she was an excellent Lucia. She doesn't belong in the second-rate recording, as we might call this one, because he is actually a very, very well sung Lucia. It's a coloratura voice, it's not a big one, but it's sung with nuance and with clarity. So I don't exactly understand why she's not famous at all nowadays. The rest of the cast is again excellent. Gianni Poggi, in his suitable repertoire, he delivers a very vocally adept Edgardo. Him in lyric repertoire is very good, not in spinto or dramatic repertoire. Anselmo Colzani as Enrico, again, he is unbeatable in villain roles, and Enrico is one of them that he excelled in. Silvio Maionica as Raimondo, he's one of the basses that often did small roles in big recordings, but here he takes a slightly bigger one, and it is sung to perfection. It is one of the most incredible portrayals of the role I've ever heard by a comprimario bass. The next one here is from 1954, again in studio, conducted by Fausto Cleva with the orchestra and chorus of the Met Opera Association. The title role is sung by Lily Pons. I've talked about her already. Edgardo is Richard Tucker, Enrico is Frank Guerrera, and Raimondo is Norman Scott. Now, Tucker in his early years had an amazing voice, and it was really suitable for a role such as Edgardo. It was a spinto voice, but with a white marble quality in it with lyric temperament. So that's what you want in an Edgardo, a solid sung Edgardo, but again with lyric hints here and there. And that's Tucker's Edgardo. It's sung to perfection. It's amazing. Frank Guerrera and Norman Scott too, baritones and bass respectively, who did kind of smaller roles at the Met, but here they sing their roles very competently as well. The next one we have here is from 1959, again in studio with the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. Conductor is Nino Sanzogno, Lucia is Renata Scotto, Edgardo is Di Stefano, Enrico Ettore Bastianini, Raimondo is Ivo Vinco. Now, Scotto. It's another very dividing figure in opera. I'm not a big fan even of the young Scotto. I mean, it's vocally adapt for the role of Lucia. She doesn't, put a note wrong, but it's not something that you want to particularly listen to. Still, all things considered, it's a decently sung Lucia. However, Edgardo is Di Stefano, and this I consider his best recording of the role. And then again, Enrico Ettore Bastianini. There isn't much that is need to be said here. He's the best baritone ever, and this is the best reading of the role of Enrico that I've ever heard. Ivo Vinco is a bit on the weak side as Raimondo, but it's a lyric-based role, so that's okay. The final inclusion from this category is from 1961 in studio, conducted by John Pritchard with the orchestra and chorus of Santa Cecilia. Joan Sutherland is again Lucia, Renato Cioni is Edgardo, Robert Merrill is Enrico, and Cesaria Siepi is Raimondo. Sutherland's early Lucia, her first commercial recording, is not worse than the 1959 live, although it's not as impressive because it's her role debut in the 59 recording after all, but she is very well sung vocally here. Cioni as Edgardo isn't something that blows you away, but it's decently sung. Merrill and Siepi as Enrico and Raimondo respectively, excellent baritone and bass respectively, and they make the rest of the opera, except from the Lucia Edgardo parts, which are obviously the famous one. They make Lucia a complete opera because, well, Merrill is one of the best baritones, and Siepi, as I've said, is perhaps the best bass ever, up there with Jairo. So, next let's talk about films or video recordings of this opera. There aren't much, but I can still, fit in 5. The first one is from 1947. It's a film with the Fabritiis as the conductor, orchestra and chorus of Teatro dell'Opera di Roma. Lucia is Nelly Corradi, Edgardo Mario Filippeschi, Enrico Afrapoli, and Raimondo Italo-Itaio. Corradi is your typical 40s coloratura soprano. Not much to be said, but it's still, much better than what we get in the 70s and 80s, especially. And Corradi is one of the fine ones in the old school coloratura soprano lineage, and her Lucia is worth listening to, although she flats some notes here and there. Filippeschi as Edgardo is incredible. It's a role that isn't usually, being thought of as sung by a sword voice, a sword tenor. Filippeschi is one of those sword tenors, but he does an excellent Edgardo here. You can really hear his vocal mastery here. He does this role just as well as the other ones that he's done, and you can't go wrong with Filippeschi in any role at all. Afropoli and Italo Tayo are decent, Enrico's and Raimondo respectively. The filmography is not that good, it's from the 40s, but it's still on video, and if you want to get a video interpretation of this opera, go for this one. The second one we have is from 1967, conducted by Bruno Bartoletti with the NHK Symphony Orchestra. Lucia is Renata Scotto, Edgardo Carlo Bergonzi, Enrico Mario Zanassi, and Raimondo Plinio Clabassi. Now, again, I'm not the biggest fan of Scotto, but here in the late 60s, she's still listenable. She still has the high notes and coloratura runs. It's not yet the unpleasant voice that she became starting in the 70s. Bergonzi's Edgardo here, again, I've talked about him before, but here with video, it's more impressive as you can see his acting. Vocally, it's similar to the one in studio. Mario Zanassi is a decent lyric base, not the best you can get, as Enrico, a bit too light for, a villain role, but it's listenable vocally. Plinio Clabassi as Raimondo, again, he's one of the basses that usually sing small roles, comprimario roles in big recordings, but here he delivers a decent Raimondo, and he isn't, overshadowed by Zanassi at all. The third one here is another film recording. It is conducted by Carlo Felice Cillario with the orchestra and chorus of Rai. Lucia is Anna Moffo, Edgardo Lajos Cosma, Enrico Giulio Fioravanti, and Raimondo is Paolo Washington. Now, Moffo is at the start of her vocal decline here in 1971, so it's not her at her best for sure, but this, I think, is the last listenable recording that she has made. Lajos Cosma is a decent lyric tenor, a bit too light for Edgardo, but it's okay, it's listenable. Enrico is Giulio Fioravanti, an absolutely excellent baritone who can do any role, including Enrico, a villain role here. He's probably the star of the recording. Paolo Washington is a weak bass, a bit too incompetent for Raimondo, but all things considered, Moffo here is a gem to see on video. For our fourth recording, after 37 years, we see ourselves with Oliviero de Fabritiis again. This time Lucia is sung by Patricia Wise, Edgardo is Placido Domingo, Enrico is Juan Pons, and Raimondo is Dimitar Petkov. It's the Orquestra Nacional de España with the chorus of Teatro de la Zarzuela de Madrid. Now, Patricia Wise isn't an exceptionally good Lucia. I would put it on the same level as the Scotto one in 67. It's listenable, but I'm not a big fan. It's not great. Placido Domingo is in great form for 1981 here. It's not nearly as good as the one he recorded in 62, but in the 80s he was, putting out shit performances every week, and this was not one of them. He sings quite convincingly here. Juan Pons is not a good baritone. I've talked about that before, and you don't want to listen to his Enrico. However, Raimondo is Dimitar Petkov, and he is a decent lyric bass here, if not a bit weak, but it's still a good Raimondo overall. So 3 average leads and 1 bad one. But, well, what can you ask for more in the 80s? It's already mid-decline. The last one we have here is again not a single recording, but a string of related ones. These are live video recordings of Joe and Sutherland interval from the 80s. The first one we have here is from the Metropolitan, 1982, with Bonygne as the conductor. Alfredo Kraus is the Edgardo on this recording, Pablo Elvira is Enrico, and Paul Pliszka is Raimondo. Kraus and Pliszka are okay, not Elvira. He's undervoiced in Enrico, and it's a throaty projection. It's not that good, but Sutherland still, has a shadow of the amazing Lucia that she once was some 20 years ago. The other one is from 1986, from the Sydney Opera House. Richard Kruger is Edgardo, Malcolm Donnelly is Enrico, Clifford Grant is Raimondo. None of these are great at all, but Sutherland is in decent form here. It's a respectable reading of the title role. And the last one is from 1988 from Liceu, Barcelona. Bonygne is again the conductor. Kraus sings Edgardo again. Enrico is Vincenzo Zarinero. And Raimondo is Harry Dvorák. Now, this was Sutherland's last Lucia, so the historical value is obviously there. She transposes the mad scene down by a whole semitone, but it's very late in her career. What do you expect? Kraus is again an okay Edgardo. Sardinero is an okay Enrico. Not much to say about Dvorak de Raimondo. None of these three are excellent performances, but they do feature Sutherland after all, and some 20 years before this performance, she was an excellent Lucia, so that's the reasoning behind why I've put these three video recordings, just because there aren't any, better ones. Now, commercial recordings to avoid. The first one might take you by a little bit of surprise. It's Eric Leinsdorf with the Teatro dell'Opera di Roma. Lucia is Roberta Peters, Edgardo is Jan Pearce, Enrico is Felipe Maiero, and Raimondo is Giorgio Tozzi. Now, Peters, small voice. It's listenable in the 50s. It isn't, a mosquito voice, but it's still too small, I consider, for Lucia. Jan Pearce was, again, past his prime in the 50s, especially the late 50s. His Edgardo here is, subpar for a lyric tenor of his generation. Enrico is Felipe Maiero, a bit too small a voice for this role, and just not, evil enough all around. So, Peters, Pearce, and Maiero, three artists that are not bad at all, but just isn't the same level of singing that you expect from the 50s. Giorgio Tozzi, however, is an excellent Raimondo, but all things considered, this isn't one that you should go for. Another one that isn't bad is from 1970 in studio, conducted by Thomas Shippers with the London Symphony Orchestra, but it just isn't one that's good enough for you to get. Lucia is Beverly Sills. Again, same problem as Peters. Too small a voice. It isn't unlistenable at this stage, but too small a voice. Bergonzi is Edgardo. He's past his prime here for sure, but it's still a very good reading of the role. Capucilli as Enrico. I've explained my reasoning behind why I'm not a fan of him in this role. Justino Diaz is a great Raimondo, but the studio sound isn't doing him any justice at all. Third one we have here is slightly worse than the first two I've mentioned. Lucia is Montserrat Caballé, Edgardo Jose Carreras, Enrico Vincenzo Zarinero, and Raimondo is Samuel Raimi. Conductor is Jesus Lopez Cobos with the New Philharmonia Orchestra from 1976 in studio. Montserrat Caballé is not a voice that can do Lucia. She's way too bulky to do anything with, consisting of solely coloratura. And for some reason, they've decided to restore the original keys here without any, transposition down. I don't know why they did that, because Caballé probably thinks, I can't, sing a high note anyway, I can't interpolate them anyway, so let's take up the entire thing back to its original keys, and that would be a better justification to not hit the high notes. That's probably the reasoning behind this, but she still struggles immensely with the tessitura and especially the agility of the role. Carreras is too light a voice for any operatic role. Edgardo is not an exception. He does sing the very seldomly heard high E flat in the duet with Lucia, Verona a te, but it's sung in mixed voice. It's not impressive. Sardinero, okay Enrico. Samuel Raimi is an excellent Raimondo, but I would just say it's a bit too edged and a bit, too sharp a voice for a good character, a lyric bass role such as Raimondo. Now we get to the truly catastrophic ones. 2 recordings in studio, one from 1983 with Nicola Resigno conducting, and the other one from 1991 with Bonygne conducting. The problem here, quite self-explanatory, is the title role sung by Edita Gruberova. I have no comments. You don't want to listen to it. The rest of the cast does not do it any justice either. Edgardo is Alfredo Kraus. It's okay, nothing special. Renato Brusin sings Enrico. Probably the best part of the 83 recording. Still not that good though. Raimondo is Robert Lloyd. What a terrible, terrible singer. He's not a bass at all. He's a lyric baritone with 0 low register, but he can't sing high either, so he decides to label himself as a bass. What a load of bullcrap. The other recording from 91 has Neil Shikov as Edgardo. He's probably the only listenable person in the entire cast. Alexander Agache and Alistair Miles are Enrico and Raimondo, respectively. They're not, good at all, but you can't compare how bad they are with Gruberova. You just don't want to listen to that. Don't. The last recording to avoid is not one that is as bad, but still subpar. Ion Marin conducts the London Symphony Orchestra in studio from 1990. Cheryl Studer is Lucia, Edgardo is Domingo, Enrico is Juan Pons, and Raimondo is Samuel Ramey. I've explained about Pons before. Ramey is also, not bad on this recording, but I've explained the reasoning already. Domingo in the 90s, don't even bother. Studer is not a bad voice, but it's still, awkward in this role. It's not a orthodox projection, but it's too light a voice, and you can't expect much from post-90s singers, can you? Now, incredible excerpts from this opera. The first ones are, without a doubt, the mat scene. It's logical. I've chosen 3 old school coloratura sopranos who had done the scene magnificently. The first one is Luisa Tetrazzini, the second one Amelita Galli-Curci, and the third one is Graziella Pareto. The first 2, Tetrazzini and Galli-Curci, are perhaps the more famous ones. They're pretty self-explanatory. They're, that famous for a reason. They are extraordinarily sung mat scenes, and it's pretty self-explanatory. The old school technique is unbeatable, which is also the case of Graziella Pareto. She is not as famous as the other 2, but she still uses the same technique, and it's still a very pleasant mat scene, and a very convincing one at that. The next recording is a recording of the sextet. It features Enrico Caruso as Edgardo, Amelita Galli-Curci is again Lucia, whereas Enrico is sung by Giuseppe De Luca. Angelo Bada sings the role of Arturo, Marcel Journet is Raimondo, and Minnie Agener sings the role of Elisa. Now, just listening to the names, what a cast, man. You bring together these, the best tenor, coloratura soprano, lyric baritone, and lyric bass of the generation and put them into one studio aria recording. It's incredible. Just listen to it. The old school technique is, here you have all the greatest singers of that generation here, so you can't go wrong with that at all. The last recording we include in this category, and indeed this video, is one that might surprise some of you. It's again Placido Domingo singing Edgardo's suicide aria, the first part of it actually, which goes Tombe degli avi miei to Fra poco a me ricoverò. Now, this is from a concert in Paris from 1969 with a video. It also features Aldo Ceccato as conductor, and the other artists on the concert are Aida Menecheli and Debria Brown. He also did the Ballo duet with Menecheli in the same concert. Now, this recording of the Edgardo suicide aria, it showcases Domingo at his absolute best. At his best, he is an absolutely incredible lyric tenor. Not many lyric tenors can touch him at all. But of course, you know how his career went. From the 70s onwards, it was all downhill, and it's a shame, it's a tragedy. But here he is at his absolute best. He sings the aria with incredible pathos, with incredible clarity of tone, with a creaminess, no nasality whatsoever, and he does the cadenza as well equally. He doesn't struggle with his high notes here. How often can you say that about Domingo? I mean, it's an important recording to see what his career should have been and to compare it to what we have today. So that's the video. It has been a pleasure talking to you today in one of the roughest parts of my life. It's always good to have such a trusty audience like you to talk to. I've enjoyed making this video a lot, and I hope to see you soon in my next video. Peace out.